It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Live Line. We've got a returnee to the show today, a guest that I really enjoy because this is a topic I'm very interested in, and it affects so many people that it's good information. It's stuff that you need to know. And joining us on the Live Line today is Captain John M. Cox. He's a veteran major airline corporate and general aviation pilot. Captain Cox has flown over 14,000 hours with over 10,000 in command of jet airliners. Additionally, he's flown as an instructor, a check pilot, a test pilot, in addition to his extensive involvement in global air safety. He authors the Ask the Captain column for USA Today. I know a lot of folks see that. He serves as the aviation analyst for NBC News when you're watching and provides expertise to bunches of media outlets, including podcasts by George. He also frequently appears as an expert on the television programs Air Disasters and Why Planes Crash. And I'm watching the Mayday episodes on YouTube right now. They're replaying all those. Are up for free, and you can check those anytime on demand. I mean, those are just great. And of course, Captain Cox's day job really is he's the Chief Executive Officer of Safety Operating Systems in Washington, D.C. So now let's bring him in here and see if we can get this to work. Good morning. Hello. Hi, Captain Cox.
Good morning, George. Good to see you.
You know, I really do like this topic. You're a great host, obviously. I mean, and I think that's why you're so good on television. You've got this no-nonsense, serious approach that aviation safety really demands. But it goes all the way back to my childhood, Captain. I'm sure that you can identify with this. I grew up on a farm not far from an airport, and I tell people that the sound of summer to me isn't cicadas, it's not a gentle breeze. It's not birds in the trees. It's none of those things. For me, it's the drone of a single engine airplane. I mean, that means summertime to me. And like I said, I'm sure you can identify with that.
Yeah, I can. I started working at an airport fueling airplanes when I was 15 or 16 years old. So yeah, I know that sound, and it's one that I enjoy as well.
Okay, that's funny because I just mentioned on the last podcast with Dr. Stephen W. Schmidt, my first job when I was 14, 15, about the same age, wasn't working at the airport. I was working across the street at Connie's Skyliner Lounge and Restaurant. He used to cater the airlines. We used to put together the sandwiches and meals for the airlines, and that was my first job when I was 14 years old. Well, we got a lot of things to talk about here, and the captain's time is always limited because he's got things to do. So I want to bring up this first topic, one of many here that we want to talk about. I want to bring this up. This is from last week. Now, this is out of CNN Business, and it's all about this 5G thing. I'll read from this, and then we'll talk about it. Potentially abysmal air travel interruptions were narrowly avoided this week when wireless carriers made a last-minute change to their planned 5G rollout in response to fears that new cell service towers could interfere with a key component on passenger jets that allows them safely to land in low visibility conditions. Okay, you just go by that, but you think, no, that's when you need this stuff the most, folks. I mean, to safely land in low visibility conditions. Warnings of mass flight cancellations came as AT&T, Verizon, and the airline industry hashed out a deal to delay 5G deployment around major airports. And that's key. We're talking about a delay. And on Thursday, the Federal Aviation Administration cleared a greater number of commercial airliners to fly in the situations where pilots consider possible 5G interference to be the most dangerous. Now, nearly 80% of the United States' entire commercial airliner fleet has that clearance. So, okay, that sounds good, but Captain, I got a sense by reading through this and following this topic, this is far from resolved at this point.
That's true. This has been going on for several years, and the telecom industry had not ever previously been asked for this sort of data. And because of that, they were reluctant on a proprietary basis to provide it, where the FAA and the aviation industry was interested or really required the fact that to prove that there would not be an interference with the radar altimeters uh, in airliners and in business jets. So it was a pretty complex problem. Fortunately, the telecom industry was finally realized what was going on and agreed to delay it, which lets the tests of those radar altimeters go on to see how likely they are to actually be affected. And now about 85% of the fleet has been found to be okay. The other 15%, it's going to be problematic, and it is going to probably result in some flight disruptions at some times. But all the experts are working through it. So it's a matter of just giving them the time to do that.
Now, you're all about safety and testing, obviously. So you're saying that 80 or 85% of these planes have been tested, and you're confident that those tests show they're not going to have a problem with this 5G issue?
The relatively few manufacturers, I think there's about 4 that produce most of these devices, these radar altimeters, and they've been able to test those models against 5G interference at the power levels that are being used in the U.S., which is one of the key elements. 5G has been implemented in about 40 countries, but typically at lower power than we're using in the United States. And they have areas that are protected around airports just to prevent this. So it's all the Boeing airplanes and all the Airbus airplanes have now been cleared as that they should not be affected. There are continues notices to airmen that are out that say if you experience an anomaly on an approach to a runway, you are to report it, and that would trigger another round of investigations. But so far, we have not seen that.
Okay, so people hear that term radar altimeter. They don't know what that means. Put yourself in the cockpit here for a second. Let's say you're coming in for a landing at an airport that has extremely reduced visibility. Tell us what these things are and what you're doing with them as you land.
Well, there's a couple of things. What the device does is it sends a pulse of energy down and bounces it off the ground and comes back up to a receiver in the airplane. And with the time that it takes for that to happen, you can very accurately determine the height above the ground that the airplane is. So in very low visibility conditions, you use this to because you normally would make an automatic landing. And so the autopilot would then determine at what point to start flaring the airplane and to reducing the power. In addition to some of the airplanes also, as they get within about 5 feet of the ground, they open valves to allow the reversers to be available because you want those closed in flight. So there's a lot of things that aircraft use this pulse of energy that it sends down to the ground and comes back to determine very accurately how far above the ground you are. So it's an important device in modern jet airliners.
On the testing and the potential issues with the 5G interference, what happens to the altimeter? Does it go black? Does it get erratic? Does it come back? What's happened in the past? Oh, there's the dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the dog. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Some of the testing have shown the potential for interference where the airplane thinks it's at 300 feet when in fact it's at like 75 feet.
Oh,
so
God.
Yeah. So that's not really very good. So
No.
it could cause in low visibility conditions the airplane to flare at an inappropriate height or to reduce power inappropriately. And the pilots would be there to monitor it, but the idea that in low visibility, this is not something you would want to have happen. Now, the question, these frequencies they do have some padding in there, and it's just how susceptible the receivers are to this transmission on the 5G spectrum. And that's what they've been able to test, that the filters in the receivers are adequate. And that's what they have found in most cases.
Okay, good. Let me wrap this article up here. Let me see what it says here. The agreement to delay 5G deployment around airports is only a temporary fix, as we talked about, and it's not clear if all the negotiating parties have a specific deadline they're working toward. A significant number of planes still haven't been cleared to land in those most dangerous situations. Regional air carriers have been crying out that they've been left out of the discussions and are still facing long and short term impacts. And to the public's knowledge, a permanent solution to the issue still hasn't been settled on, it says, Captain.
The regional, some of the regional jets are proving to be the most challenging as far as how they utilize radar altimeter information and different systems in the airplane. And so they have really, there's a continuing challenge with them that they have not resolved yet. The larger airliners, Boeings and Airbuses, they have been able to get resolved. So the regional airlines are going to be more affected by this ongoing issue in the near term. Eventually, all of these devices will end up having new filters installed, and over the longer term, the problem will go away. But it's the short and medium term on some airplanes that are proving to be the challenge. And the telecom industry and FCC, they've agreed to hold this in the lower ends of the spectrum and at lower power for a period of time. But that's where one of the points of negotiation is how long.
And as you and I have discussed previously, this is much more of an important issue to pilots in certain parts of the country and around the globe. And it has to do mostly with poor visibility and weather conditions, I would imagine.
It does. It's most applicable when it's low visibility and fog conditions, which we see in the Northeast occasionally and somewhat frequently in the Northwest. So under those conditions, that's where the flight disruptions could really be significant.
Okay, good. And again, this couldn't be more important. Anything here that you want to say about the 5G issue before we move from that?
It's complex, and the solutions that some people have put forward, which sound very simplistic, are not. And so it's just a matter of understanding and being patient. There is a large group of people working on this. The FAA is being conservative, as we want them to be. And I'm actually, I applaud the FAA's approach to this. They are managing it, and they're managing it pretty well.
Well, I hope they do get it resolved. I guess my final takeaway on it is, and I mean, I love my cell phone and I depend upon it like a lot of people do. It's got a lot of nice apps and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want to infringe on anybody's right and privilege to a safe landing. I mean, honest to God, I mean, I want to err on the side of the airline industry when it comes to this. We can get by with some other form of cell phone service, I would think. And the other thing I would say, and this is a great reason to have companies like what the captain chairs, working with the government, so that we have some oversight on this, so that like a private cell phone carrier can't dominate and carry the issue simply because of the money involved. This is a safety thing, and that's why we're talking about it today.
Right. And it is being resolved. That's the good news, is the FAA and FCC are finally communicating effectively. Telecom industry and the manufacturers of the radar altimeters, they're communicating effectively finally. So it is being resolved. It didn't need to be this complicated, but we are where we are. But it is being worked.
Okay, great. Let's go to this next subject here. And this is something, again, that the captain and I have talked about on previous shows extensively, and it's this craziness that's going on in the air, and it's not getting a lot better, unfortunately. They are still having incidents like this. Now, I think there has been somewhat of a decline, but let me get into the article here. It's talking about Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, the former presidential candidate that mysteriously won the Iowa caucuses. But anyway, Buttigieg says we need to take a look at a no-fly list for unruly passengers. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg said on CNN Monday, again, that was last week, I think, that we need to take a look at placing unruly passengers on a federal no-fly list as pressure mounts on the Biden administration to continue to arrest rising violence on airplanes. Now, that was Monday this week. He says, I think we need to take a look at it. Look, the airlines are often doing their own internal no-fly list. Some of them have spoken about maybe coordinating on that, and we're looking at these policy recommendations as well. Buttigieg told CNN's Kate Bolduan in an interview. And it comes now. This made some news also. Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian sent a letter last week to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, reiterating his call for the Justice Department to prosecute unruly passengers and place them on a no-fly list. So here's the summation on this. It says last year was the worst on record for unruly passenger behavior in the United States, according to the Federal Aviation Administration data. Early in 2021, the FAA announced a zero-tolerance policy for unruly passenger behavior that skips warnings or counseling and goes directly to the penalties, which can include heavy fines. People overlook that. What they really don't understand is it could include jail time. Buttigieg pointed to encouraging news that unruly incidents are trending downward, but he understood how this was happening at an unacceptable rate. Anything besides zero is an unacceptable rate. As of February 1, there have been 323 reports of unruly passenger behavior so far this year. We're talking February, folks. According to FAA tracking, of those, 205 were mask-related incidents. 73 investigations have been initiated, with 26 enforcement action cases initiated so far this year. So there's a couple of things about statistics, and we get into stats a lot on Podcast by George, Captain, and that is that again, that's just this year, folks, and we're barely halfway through February. That's what's happening. Now, the airlines are up and I think back to full schedule operating mostly. But the other thing about those statistics, when they're talking about the high incident, the increase, the rate of these problems, air travel and the number of passengers in the pandemic, that was down. So if you look at it in that context, man, this is a really big problem, Captain.
It is. The mask related issues are the largest percentage, and I don't really understand it because it's really quite simple. If you want to fly, you have to wear a mask. Period. It's a federal regulation. The airlines they don't have any choice but to enforce that. And if you don't wear a mask, you will be escorted off the airplane. And if you resist that, then the local security or police, they will arrest you for that. And there have been literally thousands of occurrences in last year in 2021. I don't understand why people don't see that because the enforcement is uniform across the entire country. It's not as though one place says one thing and another, and it's not that way at all. So, and I support the prosecution of people who disrupt flights. It's a safety issue, and it should result in federal prosecution, be it civil fines or be it incarceration. So, and the implementation of a federal no-fly list that the Delta CEO advocates for, I think has merit, and I think certainly should be carefully looked at. I understand there's some legal issues with that, but I think on balance, the safety of the traveling public is more important than somebody's alleged right to create havoc on a flight. So I think that I support the Secretary of Transportation, and let's take a look at it. But I also would support strongly that the Attorney General of the United States, Mr. Garland, prosecute these people, because that will send a message that we as a society are not going to tolerate it.
Yeah, the word gets around, and to me, the subtitle of my show is "House of Mirrors." I look at this, and this is a common sense issue. They talk all the time about how driving, as an example, is a privilege. It's not a right. I mean, they can take away your driver's license. They can put a lock on your car. I mean, they can do a lot of things to keep you from driving if you're found to be guilty of offenses that would prevent you from doing that. Well, I look at this air travel thing, and they're not telling these people that they can't travel. They're just telling them that you can't get on a plane. And to me, that just makes good common sense.
I totally agree. If someone has shown a tendency or committed an act that creates a safety threat to an airliner, then they should be barred from future travel.
All right, let me bring up this last slide here. Now, this is from the other perspective. Now, we're talking to a pilot here. We're talking to Captain Cox, but Sarah Nelson, international president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, told CNN over the weekend that unruly behavior on planes is creating a situation where flight attendants every single day, when they're putting on their uniforms, they're not sure if that will be a sign of authority and leadership in the cabin, which it has been back to when I was a little bitty baby. You pay attention to those folks. You need to. I'll tell you something. When they read that placard and they show the safety device, I mean, I traveled a lot in business. I always gave them my attention as a courtesy more than anything. But I mean, I paid attention to, Captain. And they're concerned about being a target for a violent attack. Nelson said she is in favor of a no-fly list for unruly passengers. God love them. And I think about folks like Captain Cox. He's got 10,000, 14,000 hours in the cockpit or whatever. A lot of these guys flying these planes are ex-military. They're no-nonsense people, but they're up there behind a locked door. These flight attendants are back there with these passengers,
Right.
and a lot of them are women. And I mean, this is just God, what a sad commentary. What an unseemly circumstance.
It is. The flight attendants are really on the front lines. And I mean, I have had people arrested before, passengers that were unruly. Typically, they were intoxicated. But the flight attendants deal with it on a almost daily basis. And they do a remarkable job. They're safety professionals. They're highly trained. They've got a lot of experience. They can very easily ascertain when somebody is a potential safety threat to the operation, and they report that to the captain. And at that point, decisions are made. And one thing that is, I have listened to several people who say, "Well, I bought this ticket. I have a right to fly." The law doesn't work that way. Your purchase of the ticket does not give you a right to be disruptive. And the airline not only has the right, but the responsibility to have you removed. And that decision at the time solely rests with the captain. And that has been, it's been upheld in numerous court cases. So it's, if you argue with the captain, you're probably going to lose if you're a passenger about whether you have a right to be on the airplane or not.
Well, like you said, I hope they do lose. I hope it doesn't bother me at all. I feel sorry for the passengers that have to have their flight diverted and land in a place that they didn't want to remove somebody like that. But I mean, once something like that happens, they're fined, maybe even jailed. A no-fly list just seems to make good common sense to me. Okay, let's move off of that one because I want to get to this one. This was an interesting article that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, but I was completely unaware of this. So airlines are facing unexpected safety issues in the pandemic. More bird strikes. What the hell? What's that got to do with a pandemic? Okay. The airlines are contending with unexpected consequences of the pandemic, a rising rate in bird collisions. Called bird strikes in the industry, such collisions are rare but potentially dangerous. A flock of birds crippled both engines of that jet that Chesley Sully Sullenberger safely ditched in the Hudson River in 2009. Most collisions are less catastrophic, but airports and pilots train extensively to avoid them. There it is. There's that plane in the Hudson. Everybody has seen that and has seen the movie. Aviation industry officials haven't seen an increase in damaging accidents despite the rising rate of collisions. In the U.S., though, officials noted a substantial rise in the number of bigger bird species involved in collisions. Bald eagles, whose numbers have grown in the U.S. overall, were involved in 44 strikes with aircraft last year from the previous record of 35 for each of 2020 and 2019, according to Richard Dalbier, a wildlife advisor at the U.S. Agriculture Department. Well, okay, so you look at that and you think, where's the common sense in this? But there is some real common sense reason for this to be increasing, Captain.
There is. The bird population in the U.S. Is going up significantly, particularly true of Canada geese and some things. And they like airports. They're open. They've got good food sources. They provide visibility for the birds not to be able to see potential predators. So it's a highly desirable area for birds to go to. I mean, I've certainly had my share of bird strikes over the years, but the problem of greatest significance is the fact that the larger birds, like the geese, their populations are going up dramatically, and we're sharing the airspace with them. So the number of collisions is going up, and I'm not sure that I draw the relationship to the pandemic, because even before this, we could see the number of strikes was going up, and the population of the birds were going up. If the bird population goes up, the number of strikes are going to go up.
Yeah, this article does get into it a little bit. The pandemic correlation, I think, is that the airports weren't as busy maybe at times during the early stages of the pandemic. So again, the airports are located in these outside the city areas where the birds are, and they kind of came back to the areas that they had been previously, and that happens to be the airport. This article continues like the captain is talking about these geese posing a problem in Portland International Airport. And I remember you from an earlier show saying you've flown a lot in that part of the country. Gaggles resided on properties surrounding the airport, said Nick Atwell, senior wildlife manager for the Port of Portland and chairman of Bird Strike Committee USA. God, who would think there would be a committee like a Bird Strike Committee USA, a volunteer group of wildlife specialists who advocate for measures to reduce bird strike risk. The rate of recorded bird strikes at the airport, and that dog's must
I'm
know that
sorry
we're talking
about the
about
dog.
geese.
We're trying to get it handled. I do apologize about that.
It knows we're talking about geese. The rate of recorded bird strikes at the airport from April through June 2020 rose 122%, according to FAA data compiled by the Wall Street Journal. Bird strikes, even non-serious ones, can be costly for airlines. Most require a review for any damage by qualified maintenance teams, which can lead to delays or canceled flights. I didn't know that either. I mean, when you've got a mechanical or an issue like that, it could be because of birds. Now, and I'm sure the captain recalls this incident. On April 12, 2020, a Delta Airlines Incorporated jet at San Francisco International Airport started losing thrust in its second engine, causing the aircraft to return to the gate. The flight was canceled. The aircraft was temporarily removed from service. The airline later found a bird had been ingested in the turbine. Well, so that kind of surprises me also, because I see these turbines. I've seen them in video. They seem massive. You think, oh, a bird flies in there. It ain't going to be good for the bird, but it's not going to affect the turbine very much. But in fact, it can.
It can. We ingested a blue heron on takeoff out of Tampa one day, and it ruined a $3 million engine, and we aborted the takeoff. And that the larger birds, when they go into an engine, they can do quite a bit of damage. And what got Sullenberger in so much trouble is most of these engines are what they call fan engines, turbofan engines. And it slings the bird into the outer duct, and that really doesn't do too much damage. But if they get in the core of the engine where the turbines are and the compressor sections are, it can do quite a bit of damage. And that's what happened to Sullenberger's. They ingested multiple birds into the core of the engine. But the bird strike issue is a very complex one, but it's something we're going to have to deal with because the population rise in birds is significant, and we're gonna see more of these strikes.
I got a couple of questions for you. The pilots, long before you board the plane, are going through checklists, getting prepared for the flight. Has Do they look for birds out on the runway anytime before takeoff? Is that part of a checklist officially, or should it be?
The airport operator normally will review, and they generally have wildlife mitigation plans that they are constantly exercising. I mean, I know some of the airports are using trained falcons and things. Um, so the and that are very, very effective in making the birds go elsewhere. So they try noise. You'll hear the little popping of the CO2 guns in an effort to try to use noise to scare the birds away. So there's a lot of mitigation that does go on, but the operators and the air traffic controllers, if they see birds in the vicinity, they'll broadcast that to pilots that are in the air for landing, caution birds on final. And so you'll see that the pilots themselves are generally not involved in the mitigation or even really looking for the birds, other than if you see them in flight, you report them.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. And again, this reminds me of an earlier conversation that we had as a passenger. Somebody with your experience and knowledge, you're sitting at a window seat, and what you see and how you react, and maybe if you raise an issue compared to me. I mean, I don't know anything, but let's say I'm looking out a window and I see a bunch of birds. Um, do I tell a flight attendant? I mean, should a passenger do something like that?
It If you see a bunch of birds, the crew has already seen them. If they are posing a threat, the air traffic controllers are aware of it, and there's really not a lot you can do about it. If you're taxiing out and you see that there are a large number of, as an example, seagulls, which I've seen that numerous times, generally they'll just waddle out of the way for you as you taxi by, and then on takeoff roll, you really hope that they don't attempt to fly across the runway, and in most cases they don't. But there's not really a lot you can do. You're not going to delay the airplane because those birds can sit there for literally hours. So it's you can ask for a truck, the airport to send a truck out and try to scare them away. And I've seen that done occasionally, but for the most part, the crew's aware of it, and we're going to do everything we can to prevent a collision. But the possibility does exist.
And it is a potentially very dangerous situation, and Sullenberger probably is the best evidence. Oh, by the way, when Sully first went in the river, there was, just like all investigations, they got to determine exactly why. I mean, he said why, but it was officially determined, no doubt about it. That was a bird strike, right?
Absolutely. There were, I think, 5 Canada geese in one engine, and I think 7 in the other one.
Good Lord.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've known Sullenberger many, many, many years, as well as I had flown with the first officer. The first thing that they did, which really helped them a lot, was they started the auxiliary power unit, but they were concentrating on trying to get an engine relit, because typically that's what happens. You may lose the engine temporarily, but it will restart. And then they could have gone back and landed at one of the New York airports. So their concentration was on getting one of the 2 engines restarted. Little did they know the amount of internal damage in the core of those engines was made it impossible for those engines to run.
Just your knowledge of the 2 pilots. What are those guys doing now?
Captain Sullenberger is now the United States ambassador to the International Civil Aviation Organization in Montreal. And Jeff Skiles is an A320 captain. I'm not sure where he's based, but he's still flying the line.
Great. All right, good. Well, as we mentioned, we discussed some of these things on an earlier show. Let's bring up another thing here that you and I have talked about quite a bit. Now, this is from a local television station in Las Vegas. Las Vegas laser strikes on airlines reach record highs. This is another thing that does not seem to be abating very much. Dateline Las Vegas, and a lot of people fly in and out of Las Vegas, folks, including people that watch my show. Flights leaving from Las Vegas Valley airports are being targeted more often in the last year by people using lasers, usually laser pointers, and aiming them at aircraft. The Federal Aviation Association views these incidents as serious enough to hand down fines of $11,000 per violation. So for anybody that's got a laser pointer that thinks that this might be fun, it might be $11,000 fun and maybe worse than that. And of course, you're kind of easy to find because the laser points both ways, folks. It points to the plane and it points to where you're at. And the captain and I have talked about that. According to new data released by the FAA, pilots of all types of aircraft, including helicopters, reported 17 laser strikes in January 2022 and 165 laser strikes in all of 2021. At least 2 of the reported laser strikes resulted in injury, which can happen when the laser beam is shined directly into the pilot's eye. The incidents that were recorded as involving an injury happened on September 29th last year when a Southwest Airlines 737 jet was targeted twice. The FAA has issued $120,000 in fines for laser strikes during 2021. Violators can also face criminal penalties from federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. In 2021, there were a total of 9,723 laser strikes reported nationwide. There have been 67,558 reported laser strikes across the country since 2010. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. And when we talk about these lasers, we're not talking about the laser pointers like you see in PowerPoint presentations and that type of thing. We're talking some of these things are like military grade. They're really strong. Okay, so this talks about the fines, the penalties, and the numbers that we just had. I wanted to show this on screen, Captain, because this shows the rate, this increase in these incidents, which is really alarming. And then before I turn it over to you to talk about this a little bit, I wanted to show this on screen. These are the laser events by state. And again, these are statistics, and there's a couple of ways of looking at this. California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Illinois. And because this, again, violates common sense, anybody that would do something like this, you want to just immediately get mad about. I'd look at that and say, well, okay, that's where the yahoos are. Well, it's also where the air travel is. I mean, that's where the big airports are, and that probably has a lot to do with this, Captain.
It does. I don't understand this because it's widely publicized that, one, it creates a hazard, and secondly, it's illegal, and they can find you. And a number of these laser strikes are against law enforcement helicopters, and that just it astounds me that someone would think that it's a good idea to shine a high-powered laser at a law enforcement helicopter, knowing full well that they've got radios and they can put cars on the ground and find you very, very, very quickly. And they do with very high efficiency. So your likelihood of getting arrested goes up dramatically. So what's the point? I don't get that where the fun or the reason to do this is. As far as lasing an airliner, you're needlessly putting people at risk. I've had several friends that have been lased, and it's very, very concerning because it really lights the flight deck up, and that at night you don't need that, and that it's a big distraction. So I don't understand what people are think that why this would be a good idea. I totally and fully support the laws and the enforcement of the laws to the absolute maximum as far as fines and or incarceration.
Well, I'll say this: a lot of these people aren't exactly men's society candidates that are doing this. Probably, they wonder. They probably are doing it just to see if they can. So let's just say up front that if you're going online and you're buying a military grade laser or something that's expensive, yeah, you can do it. It can be done, folks. You can laze an airliner. I mean, you can hit the windows of the thing. So you don't need to try it just to see if you can, because it can be done. It can be potentially lethal. It can damage pilots' eyes, is that one incident that we mentioned. So don't have any doubt about it. And I mean, just use your laser and point it at your television set, because I think they're legal, but there's no need to try it just to see if you can do it. Because you certainly can. And then maybe the helicopters with the police, there might be another reason for that, and law enforcement will handle it. Well, I load these assets, as they're called. I put up these little PowerPoint presentations. I loaded up a generic, this thing, I'm going to catch this, maybe catch the captain by surprise here. Let me see if I can show this. Okay, I just had that clip. I'm kind of like the guy with the laser that I talked about. I just showed that because I could. I look at that and I just see a plane landing on a runway. What do you see when you look at that, Captain? How do you look at that differently than I do?
It turns out that I know that airline very, very, very well. I've done a lot of work with them. They're outstanding, Montreal-based Canadian operator, Leisure Travel Air Transat. It's an A330-300, and it's landing at Montreal, and the runways are nice and clear. It's the pilots made a smooth landing, so I know they're happy about that. I guess I would characterize it as somewhat of a routine day at work.
That's great. So there you go, folks. I look at it, I see a plane landing. He looks at it, he sees all of those things. Well, we got to let him go because this is a work day for the captain. He's got a lot of other things to do today. We're just delighted to have him on Podcast by George. Anything here out of everything we've talked about that you want to close with or wrap up, Captain?
No, I'm glad you brought up the 5G thing. I think that has gotten a lot of coverage on in the media, as it should, particularly since the first of the year. It is being worked, and it is something that was an identified potential problem, and the system actually worked. But this is one case where we need to look at the FAA and say, hey, they've actually done something right.
Well, he's great. I love having him on the show. Most importantly, he's a friend of the PBG. Captain, thanks again for coming on another Podcast by George Live Line.
My pleasure, George. Always good to see you.
Yeah, we'll talk again soon, pal. And folks, if you enjoy this as much as I do, there's the captain. Let me take him away here and see if I can bring myself back. I don't know what I'm doing here. Let me bring this closing. So there we go. I just wanted to say for folks that watch the podcast, if you enjoy the diversity here, I have a lot of different things on Podcast by George. I mean, we have everything from Captain John Cox to politics. I even have a little bit of hockey on here once in a while. I mean, we really have a lot of different things on the show. Please subscribe on YouTube. Now, that's where we're live streaming today. You just subscribe, ring the notification bell, and when upcoming episodes come on, you'll be notified. And then a lot of times I will put up quick takes, they're called, little short excerpts that are only 3 or 4 minutes in duration. And you can watch those instead of the entire show like we just had with the captain. Like us and follow us on Facebook, of course. And then, of course, we're also on iTunes and Spotify and really all of those places where podcasts are seen or heard. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.